Hello and welcome back to Unit 8, Evidence of Evolution, Notes 4 for Biology. Today we are going to focus on summarizing the current evidence in support of evolution and applying evolutionary theory to real-world scenarios. So we're going to do some quick practice questions since it has been a little while since we've done notes. So question number 1. Scientists believe that the first living thing was most like what? Plants, humans, bacterial cells, or dinosaurs? Go ahead, select your answer. If you selected C, bacterial cells, you are correct. Question number 2. In scientific history, there have been a number of paradigm shifts. Which of the following is an example? Isaac Newton being hit on the head with an apple, astronauts landing on the moon in 1969, a solar eclipse happening during winter, or belief in a flat Earth changing to belief in a round Earth. Go ahead and select your answer. If you selected answer choice D, belief in a flat Earth changing to belief in a round Earth, you are correct. Question number 3. Which of the following is not a requirement for life? Frozen water, lipids, nucleic acids or DNA, amino acids. Go ahead and select your answer. If you selected answer choice A, frozen water, you are correct. You have to have liquid water, not frozen. Question number 4. Panspermia is the belief that life was created by God, life arrived on Earth by meteors, life was produced by volcanic activity, or life was produced by lightning. Go ahead and select your answer. If you selected choice B, life arrived on Earth by meteors, you are correct. Question number 5. New traits are produced in living things by physical injuries, choice, different diets, or mutations. Go ahead and select your answer. If you selected choice D, mutations, sorry the box is a little off, you would be correct. New traits are produced in living things by mutations. So, moving on to evidence for evolution. Fossils are one of the greatest sources of evidence that we have. Fossils are the remains of dead organisms that reveal similarities to modern organisms. So here on the left we have an image of Archaeopteryx, and on the right kind of what it might look like. But as you can see, this was back during the time of dinosaurs, and you can see the feathers that it would have had. Another example, a trilobite, one of the most common fossils. Here we have an armadillo, and this would be an ancient armadillo. You can see similarities and differences. One thing I will say, they have found armadillos in South America in fossil form that are huge. And the armadillos that we know today are a lot smaller. So, more evidence. When you look at a lot of organisms, you will see similar structures. So, for this particular organism, You have that long spinal cord, just like here, although not all the bones are found. On the head, you have this elongated snout, and you have lots of teeth that are sharp. You also have hind legs and the rib cage, so they're very similar in structure. As things continued to evolve, and this is for whales as they moved back into the ocean, this one was terrestrial on land. This one was predominantly aquatic. Sea is when they were fully back in the ocean, and you can see the pelvis and hind limbs here have basically lost their function. And as we know, whales don't have hind legs, but they do have the pelvis and hind limb area and bones that show that they did at one point have those limbs. As you can see, with these whales, they have lost the teeth because they've changed their food source over time. So, evidence of evolution. One of the things we kind of looked at, but we're going to see it again, is homologous structures. So if you remember back to last unit with genetics, we talked about the prefix homo. Homo means same. So homologous structures are similar structures that reveal a common ancestry. So these are going to be structures that are similar between organisms. When you look at a horse, you have the upper bone, the middle bone, you have the bones that would be considered part of the wrist, and then the fingers. So when you look at a human, you have your humerus, your ulna and radius, your wrist bones, and your phalanges. Horses have the same thing. If you look at a cat, once again, all of these bones up here, whether it be a horse, human, cat, bird, whale, whatever, they have all the same structure. Then you would have a middle part of the limb. Then you would have the wrist area. And then you would finally have the fingers or the ends of the limb. So these are what are known as homologous structures. They have the same basic structure, even though they may do different things. So for humans, our arms allow us to reach and grab things. For bats, they allow them to fly. For whales, it's a fin. It allows them to swim. Horses and cats, they both walk on theirs, but even though they both walk on them, they both serve different purposes. The horse has a hoof, whereas the cat has claws. So they all may serve different functions, but they all have similar structures. Next, you have vestigial structures, and this is kind of what we were looking at in the whale. They're useless remnants of a trait that ancestors used to have. So for the whales, we talked about the pelvic region, how they don't have a need for it anymore because they don't have back legs. In some snake species, you will find small hind limbs are visible. They serve no purpose. They don't use them. In humans, you have the coccyx bone, aka your tailbone. You, at one point, while you were inside your mom, before you were born, had a tail. The tail broke off. It went through a process known as apoptosis, where the cells there were scheduled to die, and they did. And therefore you weren't born with a tail. Some people are, but we still have the remnants of the tailbone. Another example in humans would be the ability to wiggle your ears. No purpose. And other organisms like cats, rabbits, dogs, horses, they use that to listen for either predators or prey. And again, in humans, one that we believe to be a vestigial structure. Not 100% sure if it actually does anything, the appendix. Your appendix really does nothing other than, if it becomes inflamed, make you go to the hospital and have to have it removed. Otherwise, it just kind of sits there. Down here we have a lovely little bird who doesn't have the ability to fly. So, even though it still has some things, certain parts of it are not as useful as they used to be. Another example of evidence is looking at embryo development. So I mentioned that humans, at a point during embryonic development, will have a tail, and the tail will eventually just disappear and get disposed of. So what an embryo is an early pre-birth stage of an organism. By looking at different embryos, we see shared structures that are not present in adult forms like that tail. All vertebrate embryos have tails and gill pouches. So, when we look at all of these different organisms, they're all somewhat similar, especially as you get further and further down, the more similar they look. Then you have DNA evidence. The more similar two organisms' DNA is, the more closely they are related. This helps to provide information about common ancestry. So if humans and another organism share 90% of their DNA, and then humans and a third organism only share 75% of their DNA, we're going to be more closely related to the one that we share 90% with than the one we share 70% with. So when you look at different organisms, you can compare how similar their DNA is. So like here with the human and the chimp, they have pretty similar DNA than when you compare it to a mouse. So in summary, we're going to go through these kind of together. The first living thing was simple. Then we know that life's building blocks were animated by something like lightning. New traits were created by DNA mutations. The advantageous traits gave a higher fitness or ability to survive and reproduce, while undesirable traits were discarded by natural selection. So if you think back to the rabbits we talked about, if you have brown rabbits and white rabbits and they live in the Arctic where it's white because of the snow, the white rabbits are going to survive. If you have brown rabbits and white rabbits and they live in a forest in Missouri, the brown rabbits are going to survive because they blend in better. So if the trait is more advantageous and allows you to survive longer and pass on your genes and be more fit, then you pass on those traits and they become more prominent in the population. And then over billions of years, the first living things evolved to become every living thing we see now. There is an assignment at our class website as well as the Do Now for the notes. So please make sure you complete all of the assignments. Remember, you are able to complete them, and if you miss things, you're able to go back in and resubmit. Please remember, during this process, all the work you do will help your grade. You cannot hurt your grade by completing any of this work. Have a good day, and I look forward to our next lesson.